Kevin Durso covers the Flyers for 97.3 ESPN.com. He is set to jump on board with the very latest on the NHL's plan to return. Governor Phil Murphy, by the way, announced earlier today that major sports leagues were given the go-ahead to begin training back in the state, which means the Flyers have a facility in Voorhees that they can get back to practice, and it looks like they will have a league to get back to play in. What are the details? When can we expect it? How will it all look? Kevin Durso, 97.3 ESPN.com, joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. All right, Kevin, we got a lot to dive into here. So let's get the lowdown from you first. 24 teams will resume. That means not everybody's coming back. So how will this 24-team playoff tournament look?
Yeah, Mike Broads, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and we're starting to see the possibilities of what this is going to look like. So, 24 teams coming back to play, the top 12 in each conference, ranked by points percentage at the time of the pause on March 12th. The other 7 teams that did not make this playoff structure will enter the draft lottery, and Gary Bettman did say in his announcement this afternoon that it is officially the end of the regular season at this point. The regular season, from a number standpoint, is over. So each conference will get assigned a city where they will be able to play, one of these hub cities, and they're looking at several that we'll probably get into later on in our conversation. But mainly from a playoff structure, you're looking at the top 12, the top 4 in each one will play a round-robin style tournament to determine seeding among the top 4. The rest will play each other 5 through 12 to determine the other 4 teams that move on, and that will be a best-of-5 series and a qualifying play-in round, as they're calling it. And luckily for the Flyers, they come in that 4th seed right now, so they are officially in the first round of the playoffs, should everything go as planned based on this tentative plan. And they will be playing somebody coming out of this qualifying round. It just depends on what their seeding becomes based on their play in the round robin and who wins the matchup that corresponds with their seeding at that point.
So the top 12 teams in each conference as of the March 12th pause day will participate in the 2014 playoff, which means that the Sabres, Devils, Senators, Red Wings, Ducks, Kings, and Sharks, they are done. Their seasons are over. Those players are on vacation. The tournaments are expected to be played in either Vegas, Toronto, Chicago, Columbus, Edmonton, Dallas, L.A., Minnesota, Vancouver, and or Pittsburgh to host here. And then I guess we'll get a follow-up announcement about the dates for games, on when this could all start. Is that the next phase that we're waiting for now?
That'll definitely be part of the next phase we're waiting for. And I think first things first, what we need to hear is the move to phase 2 officially. Right now, all they're giving you is a generalized term, basically, of early June. You really need to get a firm date on that to understand where things can go. The only firm date that was actually put out as part of this announcement was that phase 3, which is the formal training camp, will not begin prior to July 1st. And Bettman even added that he doesn't envision this happening even in the first half of July. So instantly push your expectations back a little bit, that there is still a ways to go on this, and they're more or less just doing this for due diligence. And then they didn't even give a guideline time for phase 4, which is actually going to the hub cities and playing these games, because the timing of this and the sites themselves will be determined later. Now, Bettman did say following the press conference in an interview that was on television that they have to make a decision on the hub cities probably within the next 3 weeks, just to get an idea of what will work, to have a good idea of which cities emerge as the highest ones and in constant communication. Like, there are 3 Canadian cities listed on that list of 10, and realistically the situation in Canada could be totally different than in the U.S. There's a mandatory 14-day self-quarantine period for anybody who goes into Canada. So they are considering all of that, and if it's not viable to work for this system that they have just put forward, then unfortunately no Canadian city would be part of this, and it would be strictly limited to the U.S. cities that are on this list. I've always seen, everything I've seen so far is Columbus, Vegas is the 2 that seem to keep coming up the most. And that's where my focus is for now. It can certainly change. There were a few cities on this list that I hadn't previously heard at all, namely Pittsburgh or Toronto. They were ones that I hadn't heard anything about at all. And that's all to be determined. But there really is no firm dates on anything. And mainly that's because from the very top of this, Bettman had said that health and safety are the most important thing, and they will take their guidance on when they can resume play from civil leaders and medical authorities to actually give the clearance to play before they do anything else.
Don't get me wrong. It's definitely great to hear that the NHL is coming out and speaking about positive things when it could be back. But realistically, it does seem like there won't be hockey for a long period of time. And when you look at this phase 2 that you tweeted out, which would be return to team practice facilities in small groups, which will hopefully begin in early June, the gap between phase 2 and phase 3, which is a full training camp, is a big gap.
Yeah, it appears that way. It really depends on what the date is that they actually allow for the players to return for phase 2. If phase 2 doesn't happen until, say, mid-June instead of early June, it's really a 2-week period to get them into the facility to start to work out, and potentially July 1st or shortly after, you're talking a full training camp, and it was roughly a 3-week workout period. So on paper, and to read it out like that and to spell it out where we are on May 26th, it's a long period of time, and it is a big gap. But in reality, you're looking at probably this thing really kicking into high gear over the next month to try to pursue this, especially since a lot of things have opened up, namely the news we got this morning about how New Jersey's opened up for practice for professional athletes. If they're opening some things up on that level, then as others follow, it might become the perfect time to jump back into this head first and really tackle this plan head on, of course, with doing it with the proper guidelines. But it might be the best opportunity to do this and to make this plan work. So I can see how on the surface it looks like a really big timeline and doesn't sound like things will be coming back soon. But in reality, you're looking at possibly another 2 to 3 weeks before there may be players reporting to the training facilities and starting this phase 2 and working their way towards phase 3.
I hope you are right. But I want to dive back into the top 4 teams and how you were talking about how they're going to essentially play it out. Now, for the Flyers, you really have nothing to lose. But what do you think about the Bruins, who have 100 points, which is 8 more than Tampa Bay? Like, I feel as if the top teams who have the most points, and same in the Western Conference, are somewhat getting screwed compared to the 4th place team, which would be the Flyers, where it's okay, you really don't have much to lose.
It's interesting you bring that up, Rhodes, because first of all, one of the 2 teams that didn't have an approving vote from the Players Association was Tampa Bay, sitting at 2. So that's a team in the top 4 of a conference that kind of said, "Well, wait a minute here. We don't really like the way this is sounding because there's a lot of shuffling that could go on in this." You're absolutely right. For the Flyers, there's nothing to lose and everything to gain. I actually saw that. Even though everything would be handled using regular season tiebreaker type formats in both standing position and in game results in this round robin, so you would have 3-on-3 overtime and potentially shootouts if it went that far, that if the Flyers went 3-0 against Boston, Tampa Bay, and Washington, they'd come away with the first seed. And there's everything to gain from that and absolutely nothing to lose. You could go 0-3, not win a game, have to shake off the rust and look terrible in the process, and at least you didn't lose anything out of it. You're still the 4 seed, and you're playing the winner of 5-12, probably, unless they do a reseeding, and that's one of those things that's out of this that's still to be determined. But at least you still are the 4 seed no matter what, and you're getting one of the teams from the qualifying round. So there is nothing to lose, and you're right. A team like Boston is probably sitting there and could be worried about how they come back, and if they don't come back sharp like another team does, that they could easily go from 1 to 4 that quickly, even though they were substantially better at the time of the pause.
Are you surprised, Kevin, that Buffalo, Jersey, Anaheim, L.A., San Jose, Ottawa, Detroit were essentially said, "Thanks for playing, you're done," because we've heard so much about the regional sports networks saying, "Look, we need some games back on our channel here because we got hammered by losing 2 months worth of programming"?
I'd be a little bit surprised from that angle, specifically from the regional networks, because that's part of the big reason that you look at the last 2 teams that get in. Both 12 seeds are major markets, Montreal and Chicago. So yes, there are from that angle, I'm a little bit surprised. From the other, I'm not really surprised, and only because they voted in approval of this system. From a team standpoint, they did vote to do away with the rest of their regular season and just go into the lottery. So the only 2 teams that didn't give an approving vote were Tampa Bay, like I said, and Carolina was the other one that said no to the 24-team structure. And that's because a team like Carolina is going to play the New York Rangers in that qualifying round, best of 5, and they lost all 4 games to the Rangers in the regular season. So it's kind of we don't want to play this team because they had our number the entire year, and now you're telling us that we have to play them in a 5-game series just to make the traditional playoff structure. So from that angle, I'm not surprised that those teams said or approved the structure of the playoffs in the 24 teams, because they gave approving votes. But from a network standpoint, I certainly see the point, and that is a little surprising that those networks, certainly in areas where it fills up a big chunk of the programming, like a Buffalo is a good example. That would be one where I'm a little surprised that they didn't fight harder for it from the TV side.
Why do you think they're going to potentially have a best-of-5 series early on? Like, if you think about this, is that the difference maker in getting back or not? Because, it just seems like they can do best-of-7, so why not keep it the way that it has been?
You're exactly right, bro. That's the basis of it is to ensure that they can still have a full calendar year in the 2020-21 season. And that is a big question mark at the moment, just because you don't know when you're going to play your first game in the return to play and get to phase 4. If it was that easy to spell out, it was encouraging to hear Gary Bettman say that he thinks that the qualifying round, the first round and the second round, could be played and completed in about a month's time. And then you're looking at just the conference finals and the Stanley Cup final left to play out the rest of the season. And realistically, within 2 months of getting to phase 4, you're back into the off season. You're having all the off season activities, and you're working your way toward the next year. And let's say that is over the month of October and November that you're doing that, and you pick right back up in December and start a new year and maybe find a way to structure it where you can still fit in 82 games like they want to. The difference here is that if this gets delayed in any way, if the training camp in phase 3 doesn't start until mid-July or even late July, now you're pushing the season back into maybe mid-August. The longer the timeline goes, the more likely they might just cut those first round and second round series short and go to 5 games to make sure they can still play out the next season with some sense of normalcy the way that they have in years past. That's basically what it comes down to. So I'm all for trying to do this the traditional way. I think doing the qualifying round as a best of 5 and then the rest of the playoffs as best of 7 would feel normal for everybody else, and that's the best way to do it, to honor the integrity of the game and hand out the Stanley Cup with the tradition that Gary Bettman has talked about since day one of trying to find a way to do this. And I think you lose a little bit of the luster if you cut out a few games from the first and second round and don't have best of 7s until the conference finals. It just doesn't seem the same.
Kevin, this is tough to ask. Okay, Pittsburgh's a 5 seed. By the way, the Flyers creeping into that 2 spot right at the end there ended up being a huge thing for them, because now they get to play basically a handful of games against the league's best. Worst case scenario is they're right where they end at the season. So whereas these other teams, if you were Pittsburgh as the 5 seed, which could have been Philly, you're saying, hey, welcome aboard. You got to play a 5-game series after sitting out for 2 months. And, oh, by the way, the loser's done. I mean, the 5 seed in this situation, Pittsburgh up against 12 seed at Montreal, they got really screwed.
Yeah, and I told Josh on Sports Bash Saturday when I was on that if you're in that 5 to 12 portion of this and you're having to play a best of 5, it's the worst place to be. You should be fearing everything about that part of it, because you have to essentially come back from being off for 2.5 months, pushing 3 months realistically until you're able to do everything and get back to training, and you're going to get thrown into games whenever the time comes and have to play for your life and play
meaningful games. Meaningful games.
They're all meaningful. And the Flyers are sitting here in 4th, and the same, even like Bros alluded to, if you're a Boston who's sitting in 1st, you don't even have a comfort level in these 3 games, because if you don't play, we're seed. And that makes a big difference, too, in how you approach it. The Flyers are in the best position out of any team in the Eastern Conference to be in the 4 and say, it doesn't matter if we lose all 3 games. It doesn't matter if we win all 3 games. We're at the worst, we're going to be the 4, and we could be the 1 if we're that good coming out of this break. And if we're not, it doesn't matter. We're going to play one of these qualifying teams. And that team comes in potentially having played 2 more games than the Flyers would have. So that all works in their favor for sure.
There's your news today. The NHL will abandon the rest of the regular season, and they will pick up with a 2014 playoff. The Flyers will play in a 14-round robin, and we don't have any dates on that. But Kevin Durso, has it all. More details at 973ESPN.com. Kevin_Durso on Twitter. All right, pal. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
He's the best. And you can, of course, like all guests appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. There you go. So he really broke it down pretty good there. It's going to be, the matchups are, bros, Pittsburgh, Montreal, 5-12, 6-11, Carolina Rangers, Islanders, Florida in the 7-10, and the 8-9 is Toronto, Columbus. That is your basically bottom half. And then it's Boston, Tampa, Washington, and Philly will play a round-robin tournament to determine the top 4 seeds.
The more I think about this, I am so pumped for the Flyers. I think they're in a good spot. I
See
really
the Flyers
do.
tweet just a
What's
minute
that?
ago? See the Flyers tweet just a minute ago?
No, what did
There's
they say?
only one thing left to do, and it's a picture of, looks like,
Kevin Hayes.
yeah, with the belt.
Woo! Goosebumps, baby.